their website. A lot of state from the county. Something else. That Don's book has got the printing backwards.
Yeah. Well, those guys are backwards a little bit sometimes.
How we get the,
I can. It's not working. That's quite all right.
everything else, it's always going to be one thing.
Yeah, great.
So, can I do some announcements and introduce you?
You may do anything you like. I'm very flexible.
Okay, well then, we will get started, because I have about 15 things to announce.
Okay, you go right ahead. I will be right over here.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Well, I'm going to totally turn on all of our microphones. Welcome on this chilly Saturday morning to our second Saturday presentation. Before we get started, we do have several upcoming events that I want to let everyone know about. For you who know homeschool families, we have started a homeschooling program a couple of times a month at the Agriculture and Industrial Museum. And so each homeschool day features a different student-centered workshop that's led by staff, and then free time to explore the museum and our interactive exhibits. And so our next one will be January 18th at 11 o'clock, and the topic for that one will be mural storytelling. Our York Civil War Roundtable is on January 19th, and Dr. Bradley Godfrey will present Hill Comes to Southern Maryland, the story of the Point Lookout Civil War prisoner of war camp. All vets will be on January 26th, and they will welcome Ken Baer, who served in Vietnam as a tanker. South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society will have their meeting here on February 6th, and Charles Kaufman will present Pennsylvania's Celtic language heritage. And we'll get into February a little bit too, because we do have a lot coming up. Our next second Saturday presentation will be on February 12th, and Rich Wagner will discuss brewing in York, and we'll share information and images about the history of brewing in York from the borough's earliest breweries to present day. And then on Thursday, February 17th at 7 o'clock, Dr. Peter Levy will present a webinar entitled York's Rosa Parks, Daisy Myers and the Quest for the American Dream. Linda Myers, Daisy's daughter, will join Dr. Levy in a question and answer session after the program. Some of these are online. Some of these are both online and in person. So please check our website for details about each presentation. Then February 18th, a lot of stuff right in a row. We're starting a new program called Spirits of the Past, and this is a historic mixology class that will take place different times, like probably quarterly. But our first one will be February 18th, and we'll be talking about 18th century and early American drinking, taverns, Kill Devil, and the rise of punch. And you'll be able to sample fish house punch, because it's very potent and it makes a large quantity. But you will be learning how to make a drink called bumbo, which is also rum-based, but very different. Yeah, and if I let people go at the fish house punch, somebody with experience told me that we better have a good hangover remedy for you as well, but I don't. So, but that's February 18th, and that is not a free class. There is a charge for that class, so please check our website. And our annual family day will be February 19th at the Agriculture and Industrial Museum for children and families. So if you want to have some fun together, that's happening that day. It's from 10 to 3. Now, Jimmy, most of you I think know Jimmy, so I just feel like I don't need to really introduce him, but he's a collector of antique automobiles and arcade games. And he is also the owner of the operator of the Old Sledworks Antique and Craft Market, housed in the Lightning Guider Sled Factory in Duncan. Jimmy's going to speak to us today about service stations in York County and beyond, and how his book Got Gas, a pictorial look at central Pennsylvania service stations from the 20th century came to be, and some call for sort of information on some of the photos that he has in his collection. So, Jimmy.
okay? That's all?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Very great. Thank you. Testing. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming today and online. This is my first attempt at a real talk, and I've said that already before, that I've organized, and I have these flashbacks of college, of doing these kinds of things. I enjoy the book signings that I've done and will do, and I'm pleased to be part of, York County History Center now, and plan some future projects. So we're going to get started. The first slide that's been up here, some of you might know Robbie Wolf from the American Pickers. He received one of the first books when it came out earlier this summer. So I was very pleased that he mentioned me in the book. That kind of publicity is really helping, spur sales of the book. So again, my name is Jimmy Rosen, and I am the author of the book. My name is on the front. However, I'm more of an organizer than an author. I'm really not a writer. But over the course of my business life, I put together good people in my organization. And I like to give them credit. I wish I had all their names, although they are mentioned in the book. My name is on the front. But I did finance it, so that's kind of important in the scheme of things. So the cover of the book, pretty much says it all. I came up with kind of a cute title that makes people laugh because it's sort of a secondary meaning. But why is the interest in old service stations? I mean, why is there so many people interested in car culture, old gas stations? I mean, it could have been a dirtier business, literally dirtier business, grease, oil, gas. I mean, people love today to collect what's called Petroleum, gas and oil collectibles. Signs, oil cans, other vintage equipment. People are even buying old gas station buildings and rehabbing them for other uses or just a general man cave. I know people who bought a gas station building just to house their collection. I'd actually like to do that at some point in my life. But gas pumps themselves could be more popular right now as far as a collectible. I mean, you may not specifically want an old gas pump, but they were utilitarian. I mean, they served a basic function like an old Coke machine or a jukebox. I mean, it dispensed gas, the jukebox played a record, Coke machine dispensed the soda. Now it's getting tough to, you can find them, but the manufacturers didn't intend on them to last so long and be in somebody's game room, decades later with such high prices. And thanks to people like the American Pickers and the Antiques Roadshow, and generally the internet has caused prices to escalate. So it's very hard. The fun of it is still finding some of these items sort of in the wild, they call it. You find an old gas pump still on a farm somewhere. It's getting harder to do. But even driving through York City, which I've enjoyed already, you can still see remnants of old signs, things on buildings that are sort of hidden in plain sight that, I really appreciate, because so much today, signs made on buildings today are so generic, and they're never going to last 50 years anyway. They're just lighted plexiglass boxes. Things had character. So even gas pumps 100 years ago, they were so ornate. They were built to last forever. And if you've ever moved one, you know that they are incredibly heavy. I have several, and I enjoy having them on display, and it goes well with my book project. So before I discuss the making of the book, I usually like to spend about an hour talking about the early petroleum industry, you know, the science of gasoline, refining processes. I like to include some history of John Rockefeller's oil monopoly and how the government eventually broke it up. You know, I'll touch on the change from full service stations to self-service stations and why this occurred. Just kidding. You're going to soon realize I have a good sense of humor. I take the book project seriously, but you can Google all the petroleum industry. It's all out there. There's plenty of history on the internet and other books, you know, not my book. Mine's a picture book with some captions and some very interesting articles written by some very interesting authors who I had contributed to the book. So there's just a few short stories sprinkled in for those who like a little light reading. So no, I'm not going to spend an hour talking about the petroleum industry. So let's go back to the beginning of the project and how I started this. I don't know why that was there. Next one. Geez, I think my family is sabotaging my display here. Sorry about that. Again, you guessed my sense of humor here, so I want it to be a light morning here about this topic. But so we're going to go right into, and you can go to the next slide because I have his name on there. And the reason the book exists, and Bob's not here, he's still living, but this is Bob Schultz. And Bob Schultz, that's he's a young man. This picture's in the book of Bob. And he is responsible for the content of the book. Bob worked for Atlantic Refining in Harrisburg in the 60s. Yep, you met Bob. Bob, you can go to the next slide too. That's a picture of Bob at the sled works. He's working on my Model T. I have a Model T taxi cab that I enjoy driving. And actually, Bob is a AACA car museum volunteer. He tinkers on their cars. He also gives driving lessons in Model Ts. And Bob and his wife Dottie were one of the first vendors at the old sled works 31 years ago when I opened. So it's been an interesting journey, I guess, how things happen. And a few years ago, Bob and his wife were downsizing. Yeah, they live in the Dillsburg area. And Bob said, Jimmy, I have boxes. I have some pictures and road maps, some old ads for cars. He was very understated about what he had. And I dragged my feet. I still have the voicemail on my phone from literally over 2 years ago when he contacted me. And so I agreed to meet him at the house and picked up these boxes that I really didn't look at right away because it was evening and it was dark, and I put everything in my vehicle and I headed home. And he said, do whatever you want with this. You know, that was his, you want to get rid of them? You want to do something with them? And again, I had no idea, you know, really what he had. So I proceeded then that evening to take out everything that he'd given me. And there were binders, photo albums, and sleeves filled with wonderful photos, but the accompanying original negatives, the 3x5 large format negatives, hundreds of photos. And a lot of them were still stuck in albums, that old style album where you put the photo in and, you know, you can never get them out. But they were intended to be good years ago, but it proved to be an issue with me early on. So I spread everything out on my dining room table to the dismay of my wife for weeks, looking through these photos. Most of them weren't marked. And I knew that they were all central Pennsylvania. And next slide. Bob worked in the Harrisburg district office, and this is one of the pictures in the collection. This is the district office in Harrisburg. And you can see under the roof line, it says the Atlantic Refining Company. This office closed in 1969. And one of Bob's chores was to clear out the office, clean it out. They're going to be moving to another location, throw everything out. So in the supply closet, he came across these boxes of photos and negatives. Realizing that they were professionally taken photos by Atlantic photographer, primarily in the early 1900s through the 30s, are most of these photos. But they were to be thrown out. Bob saved them. Bob put them in boxes, took them home, and literally for the last 52 years, they've been resting quietly on his shelf. And so remarkably, these were photos that have not been published before. Most of these are, the majority of them, because I have the original negatives. They were not postcards. They were not things you could readily find on eBay. They were not published. And they may have been used at some point. We're still trying to, not trying to figure out, but when you see the quality of the pictures, you'll understand. I do have this is an early work truck, and you can see it was parked in front of the building. So you'll see that I have multiple small chapters in the book on different areas of the photographs, because what I had to do was, organize them, because there was no organization of them. They were just in piles. But you can still see the sign. Next slide. So this is today, a couple weeks ago. That's my 1947 Plymouth, parked in front of the building that still exists today. Now, part of the sign is obscured, but it's part of a recycling operation on North 7th Street. And you drive by it, everybody drives by it often, but they don't see the Atlantic sign that's still under there. So it's really a shrine to me, and it was appropriate for me. So I had my car a year ago, hand-lettered. That's the address on my door. White Flash was a brand of Atlantic gasoline that's prominent in my pictures. And if you look at the fender, there's a 4-digit phone number. And I have a antique 1939 Harrisburg phone book, and that's an accurate phone number for that office. Yeah, there's another shot of my car. And I drive that around. I drive all my cars. Actually, my Model T is in the background. That's a cab, the taxi cab that I had decorated like Ernie's Taxi in It's a Wonderful Life. I have several vehicles, and they all have themes to them. And I enjoy being out in them. In the future, I have a Model A pickup truck that's just coming out of the Car Museum in Hershey that I plan to display at the Agricultural and Industrial Museum here in a few weeks. So I have all these photos. What am I going to do with them? What's my organization? What's my plan? Honestly, I really didn't have a plan to do a book. I just thought they were interesting to look at and research. And while it's been a fun project, I'll just touch briefly on sort of the inspiration for it, which my mother, about at the same time I got these photos, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And COVID was starting. So this is January of 2020 as I'm really going into the research part of it, and a much needed distraction in my life. So with that, I spent time heading from Harrisburg to New York City, where my mother lived, for her cancer treatments, bringing my photos and, you know, other things along to research while I had 3 hours on a train ride in each direction for a while. So with that, we'll get more on to, so what were the plans then as I was researching these? There's a Facebook, I use Facebook for good. Some of you are on Facebook, some of you are not on Facebook. And I've explained this to Christine, I like Facebook for the information, for spreading details about fun projects, interesting things, research, nostalgia. So it was perfect for me to begin to research my photos. And there's a really interesting group in Harrisburg, like many cities, they have a Harrisburg History Facebook group. And while I was on that for a while, posting pictures and having people guess where these locations were, I befriended a young lady named Emily, and a guy, his name's Kurt, and we became friends online, and they became my researchers. They just enjoyed the process. I would funnel them photos. There's some of them you can see here, and we would look at ways to identify the locations. Only a few photos had markings on the back, and I went through some of the obvious ones. If you look, none of them that are here, but some had a street sign that was apparent, a proprietor's name on the door that I could use my Harrisburg phone directory and find an address. But then most of them, the clues were not apparent. So we were like detectives. We spent nearly 2 years, not every day, but 2 years going through the bulk of the photos, trying to identify the locations. So the first, you see the, well, newspapers.com, Sanborn fire insurance maps, vintage aerial photos, Google Street View, and my only hard copy, my Harrisburg phone book, were the primary research tools. And believe it or not necessarily, in these days, we didn't set foot into a regular library, not because we didn't want to, but it's amazing how much you can find online, at home, in moments that you could have spent literally years going through microfilms in the old-fashioned way and actually never discovering what we discovered. So this is Emily, and she's in my office. That's really my Got Gas studio, my Got Gas office. She's sitting at a desk pouring through photos, and Bob Schultz was responsible for the content. I give Emily a lot of credit for doing enough research to create a book, because she was so enthusiastic about history, local history, and made it a real project for her for literally 2 years. And I never met her before. And we became friends, and the other fellow, Kurt, and all three of us got together literally online. We didn't see each other much in person because, again, COVID was going on, and we could do this, you know, away from each other. So that's Emily sitting at a desk, going through some of the photos. And interestingly, a lot of the photos, you know, like I said, had clues that were obvious. I mean, there's the name of the owner of the gas station above the doorway, a bunch of smiling faces there, which has been another part of the project that I'm enjoying, because we're starting to discover who those people are, because the book is getting out there and we're getting contacted by relatives already. So my hope moving forward then will be to identify more people. We know Mr. Patterson could be one of those fellows in there, but those are some of his mechanics. But you're looking at a very neat display also. One of the themes you'll see is that the photography is soon after a location opened. That's what we've discovered. These were professionally taken photos, I said, by an Atlantic refining photographer. The cans are all nice and neat, not a lot of clutter. And that's due to the fact that these were professionally taken photos. And interestingly, in several of the photos, there's a Model A car in the scene. And I was told by Bob that that was the photographer's car that showed up a lot in the photos. There's little things in some of the photos that you pick up on over time. But if you're a Model A collector, you'll recognize the same car. But so that was a sample of what Emily and I and Kurt would look at and go, that's pretty easy to figure out. We'd go to newspapers.com. We'd go to one of their, online, and almost immediately, we knew right where that photo was. I'm impressed with the architecture of gas stations. I mean, that's an Art Deco looking Atlantic. Nice and clean, as you can see, with giant pumps in the front there. But here's an example of how newspapers.com helped us. And if you're not familiar, newspapers.com is a wonderful resource. You've got to subscribe to it. But it is archived newspapers from, I don't know how far back, but it's searchable. That's the unbelievable thing about newspapers.com. You can search your family name, family history, businesses in so many newspapers that I don't know who scans this stuff. I don't know who's standing around scanning it, but I'm amazed at it. But meanwhile, you can search not only words and articles, but words and pictures. That's the key to our project here. We found old advertisements in old newspapers that we would have never been able to find in a library, in a typical library setting. We wouldn't have been able to search it in an index. But because ads are searchable, this was an example of a picture. There were no clues readily available. There was no name above the doorway. But we zoomed in on areas. So having the original negatives made it important too, because the clarity of zooming in and allowed us to see other detail. So even though Paul's battery service had nothing to do with the gas station, it was a clue because it was on a street nearby. And then using newspapers.com, we found an ad for Paul's battery service on North 5th Street, which happens to be in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. And with a little more work, we realized exactly where the gas station was. And so that's, again, how we discovered, that specific location and many others over the course of the 2 years. I mean, it was actually fun, but you can see the Paul's battery service and the battery word are highlighted. We didn't do that. We searched newspapers.com for some key words, and then it comes back and it's automatically highlighted like that. So it's really remarkable how much information you can find and how easily you can find. Honestly, this book would not be here without some of these online resources, because we would never have found this information.
I know sometimes you get really fancy lettering, that highlighting thing will miss.
Yes, yeah, okay, right. And some of the how it scans ads, right? There could be, but it is remarkable because that's a picture. That's a display ad, not a written article. Written articles, you would find the words more readily, but yes, it's finding words in an article.
They're written fairly clear like that.
Yeah, that helps. It definitely helps.
Victorian lettering or something.
May not understand, right. The technology, the software that does this is just unbelievable. So now this is an example of a combination of newspapers.com and these Sanborn fire insurance maps. So this is interesting location by itself, first of all. This was one of 3 octagon-shaped gas stations, service stations in Harrisburg City. There was only 3. I actually have all 3 of them in my book. Now, finding this photo, again, finding all these, looking at these photos without any frame of reference early on, you have no idea where they are. You can even see some scaffolding above the back there. I mean, this gas station is still under construction. There's still work being done. You could see a little bit of wording on the building behind it. It's been cropped, but there were some other clues in this photo. But the octagon-shaped photo, and I have a chapter in my book about those. None of them exist anymore, unfortunately. But they were so ornate. They were just not what you think when you think of a gas station today. So how did we figure out this location? Well, an Atlantic search. There's our Harrisburg newspaper, 1922, sort of above there. Formal opening, so we know exactly, this is 100 years old this year. That's a century old. And if you look, I should have a comparison. I'm pretty sure they used my photograph, because I have the original negative, for the photo in the ad from 100 years ago. And so, 17th and Dairy Streets, we pinpointed it right to where it was. And to confirm that, Emily loved to verify everything. This is a Sanborn map. These were old fire insurance maps that detailed cities. The colors mean something, but there's they're blown up on South 17th Street. That's a bit of an octagon shape. Really interesting, it is to me. But there's proof at the corner there. And again, the designations, the letters, and the colors all mean something. And the fact that it says filling station verified that location. So these are that photo that I have of that octagon station. The associated ad with it likely would have been buried forever. Nobody would ever heard about it except for me doing this kind of research. You would not have found it. My Harrisburg history folks are really excited for what I've done because so many of these are in the Harrisburg city. So there's an example of how things came about with newspapers.com and the Sanborn insurance map. Here's another sample. This is a building that's not far from me, north of Duncannon, that we were able to figure out in a variety of ways. And we verified it. There's actually a service called Vintage Aerial. So there's the service station, the building next to it. I just read up on these folks too, that there's unbelievable amounts of aerial footage that has been scanned and archived that you can find and see certain time periods of things. So that verified that previous picture also. Again, I attribute Emily for finding all these things. She really made it, and it was very entertaining. And when we would discover these locations, we were really, it was like, wow, some of these were really hard to figure out, and we did. So now we'll get to one that's local, that was recently discovered. It's not in the book, but I mentioned early on here that I have a separate binder of Gulf oil photos that was given to me with the Atlantic collection, but it's a separate collection. And most of the Gulf oil photos are York County. There's some from Lancaster County, but the bulk of them were given to Bob Schultz by a salesman, and the time period is different. These are mid to late 50s to the early 60s. So before I came, within the last 2 weeks, I was researching some more since I was coming to York. I wanted to have some York related. So this was an example of how Google Maps has helped us out. So looking at this photo, you can see that looks like a grand opening, and it is. And the pennants flying above. So it's hard to see by the phone pole. Next slide, but there's a street sign there. And you're right, I'm hearing that. That's the corner of Mount Rose Avenue and Yale Street. And there's the Google Street View of it today. I did post this on the Retro York Facebook page the other day. And we've already been in touch with members of that family, Rudisil, I guess it's pronounced, have commented already and saw this photo. And it appears now, just by this random search of this photo, this appears to be the only location photo in our collection where the same family still owns it today. Now they're servicing cars, but I think there's no retail gas pumps there anymore. That whole business changed. But so I was excited that before coming here, that we made another York connection. And so, yeah, a street sign, obvious clue. So yeah, happy about that. That'll be on display. I'll make sure the York photos especially are on display at the Agricultural Industrial Museum then, you know, coming up later this month. Again, there was another sample of a great looking building. Clue wasn't obvious. So you zoom in a little bit. And what do you know? York, Pennsylvania above it. And so we were able to figure out, you know, fairly quickly then afterwards where it was. Actually, I didn't write it down. I know where it is. I have it marked down. But that was, again, another clue for a photo. But okay. Another example of, this is actually the fellow standing in front of another octagon station. You know, again, without seeing it right away, you didn't realize what it was. But it's cropped a bit. And in the top right, it's sort of out of the frame. You can see some letters up there. You go to the next one. That's an HERS. And living not far from Cameron Street in Harrisburg, there's a Hershey Creamery building on Cameron Street. And one of the octagon stations was located directly across from the Hershey Creamery. So that was our clue for this location. So we determined on Cameron Street in Harrisburg where that was. So again, that was fun, you know, interesting. Wonderful old photo. I live literally 3 miles from this location. Building is still there. Unfortunately, within the last 6 weeks, a lady drove through the building, literally drove through the building, catapulted through the building somehow, in one side and out the other. Sadly, because I was contacted soon after it happened. They said one of your book pictures was, so I don't know if the building's been come down now after nearly 100 years. But since then, a grandson has been in touch with me, telling me about a cousin in the photo. I have another shot of it, but this was an easy one to figure out because, you know, you found signs with proprietor names on them, and using my Harrisburg phone book, I could easily find them and their address there on 6th Street and Linglstown Road, Route 39 in Harrisburg. So we're not sure what the life will be of it any longer now. But, and again, take a look at some of the gas prices. Six gallons for 99 cents. And if you look, and the clarity there too is you can see that gas itself was 11. The state tax was 4 cents. Well, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but as a percentage of 11 cents, that's a pretty hefty tax. The federal tax was only a penny. In the 30s, as roads were being created, this is what I'm understanding, taxes were high to help pay for our road systems that were evolving. And, but still, 16 cents a gallon, again, while it sounds cheap, if you figure inflation, and I'm not going to start talking about that, but it's not that far off of today's gas prices per gallon when you factor in some of the inflation and the consumer pricing. That I'm not going to get into that part of it. That's math, and I'm here for pictures. Here's another example. This was a quaint-looking station. Really neat-looking Model T out front. Some early gas pump off to the side. And again, looking for clues, trying to figure out it was auto service company. Where was it? Oh, we zoom in on an area and we can see in the haze there. There's the Harrisburg State Capitol, and it's sort of blocked, but one of the covered bridges was still there. So that's in Lemoyne. That's on the bottleneck of Lemoyne. And again, we figured that out by looking carefully at the negatives and, you know, figuring that even though it's a haze there, that's our capital. Again, what helped with all this, though, was one of the first things that I did, I took all the negatives and had them professionally scanned. I spent quite a bit of money having hundreds of negatives scanned. There's a lab in Camp Hill that there may be one in New York too. I didn't want to send my photos out after them being, if they were preserved for all these years, to have them get lost somehow. So they went to a local lab, and so I had them scanned, because now I'm thinking about maybe using them for a book project. So that's how we were able to determine, because within the negatives, you know, the clarity really showed up, and we could look at the negatives then on a computer screen and enlarge them in such a way that we could see more detail. And it really is amazing to think 100-year-old photography had that much detail. And so that's how we derived a lot of our clues. So there's just a few chapters. The book is, you'll enjoy the book. Again, it's light reading, lots of interesting pictures. There's a few defined chapter. Grandmothers were at helped pump gas, manage the station. We have a chapter, a small chapter, with some photos of, we call them women at the pump. And this photo, if you're familiar with the Ford Hunter in Harrisburg, it's along Front Street in Harrisburg. There's a museum there as well, but there's a gas station across the way that's been closed. The building is still there. It's a wonderful building. It's part of Dauphin County Parks and Recreation. And I actually would like to help them reopen that as some type of store and put some old gas pumps out front. But the lady in the picture there, that was a professionally taken photo. It's been cropped, but the lady's daughter gave me these photos. I have a section in there. And she posed for some pictures for Atlantic and was in a newsletter in the 50s. And coincidentally, this woman was my wife's Sunday school teacher. And we found out she's unfortunately passed a few years ago, but the family gave me several pictures to use in the book, and they were tickled that we were able to, and they bought a lot of books over the holidays to give the grandchildren and other relatives. So that's her there. So one other part of that chapter that was interesting. Now this is again, you could tell basically a brand new Amoco American Oil service station. Now this is Front Street in Harrisburg. And what was significant about this was information we found using newspapers.com. Again, which I don't think anybody would have ever found. And I can say that because nobody would have researched this location for any reason. Nothing it's a beautiful looking station, the gas pumps there, the globes on top. That stuff is worth so much money today. There's specific pumps. But what intrigued us, that specific location, the first two women in the nation we found in a newspaper article, were employed there during World War II. They did an experiment. I think it was this monumental experiment. Could women possibly pump gas, clean a windshield, check a tire pressure? I mean, the picture in the newspaper article is definitely my picture. There's Hilda. This is Philip Spade. They're the first two women employees at Amoco anywhere in the nation. Nobody would ever have known that while we were researching it, because that came to light in a Harrisburg, old Harrisburg newspaper article. And I'm amused by it, because if the total experiment in the employment of women is successful, they plan to roll out. They have them in little uniforms, and you'll see in some of the other, it was a very sexist time, and women were really important during World War II, especially as they are all the time. My wife would smack me. These two ladies don't know if we would ever, we might look for their relatives because we have their information there. And so again, that would be another example in the book, and they're mentioned in the book that this would never have come to light. Why would anybody have researched this? And I have the original photo on Front Street in Harrisburg that prompted it. So that was sort of exciting. That was exciting. And interestingly too, I went to grade school with a young lady now who is a New York Times best-selling author. And she has written books on World War II and young women, fighter pilots. She's written books that some of you may have heard of. And she wanted to do an essay in my book about women and some gas station stories. So she's added 2 stories in my book. And so that's part of it. So she's written an article in the Women at the Pump section. Actually, I have 2 authors who contributed in the book that are New York Times best-selling authors. I have a Route 30 historian, Lincoln Highway historian that people will know, who wrote the foreword of the book. I have a firefighter historian who wrote an article. And the last article of the book, which you might find interesting, is about a gas station sandwich. I'm jumping around a little bit, but there's an article about a gas station sandwich from Harrisburg, an old Gulf station. And a man wanted to write an article about his memories of it, memories of other history in the Harrisburg area. And he wrote and rewrote the article twice. And he was my last part of the puzzle to publish a book, to get him to finish his article. And his name is Jeff Arch. And you may not recognize the name, but Jeff Arch wrote Sleepless in Seattle. He wrote the movie. And he wanted to have an article in my book. That means a lot more to me than it does to him, but he has the last article in the book. And so I was very thankful that he wrote about this obscure gas station sandwich. So it nicely wrapped up, the book as I was proceeding to, get everything published. Another section of the book, which has become probably the most interesting to people, that a lot of people have seen in other areas and other locations, is the then and now. Very good. Yep. That's actually a little bit newer version of my poster to the right. Now, again, if you have no frame of reference, you can see that the left half looks like the left half there, but when we received all these photos, it was just a big puzzle. And then we realized, wait a second, there was an addition put on that building. That's the dentist office that I still call a filling station. And I live literally 3 miles from there, and I never knew what it looked like. So I enlisted the help of the Patriot News, PennLive.com, Harrisburg's newspaper, and they sent a photographer with me to take today's pictures. The dentist has done a wonderful job preserving the building. And in the book, we do side by side, top and bottom. So there's a chapter on several of those pictures. Actually, Penn Live and the Patriot News ran stories last spring and summer, because they took many more photos with me than I have in the book. So we tried to capture the same angle, and you can see. So what I've learned from this book too is so many places still exist. They've been repurposed many different ways, but you pass them all the time without realizing. So I've made a lot of people realize what what locations look like. I think I have a couple more of them. Again, this is not too far away from me, but you can see near Grantville, Pennsylvania, not too far from Hollywood Casino. There's a photo of, and that's actually me in the doorway. I had to sneak in there, sort of like Alfred Hitchcock would sneak into one of his movies. There's a cameo of me standing in the doorway there, but it's an antique shop today. And just a wonderful location there, and even the house on the left is still there. It matches up nicely. So again, we tried to capture even the surroundings if we could. And the photographer from the Patriot News did a wonderful job. Just a little further down the road, this wasn't hard to figure out because of the sign, the Granville Hotel. There's a tanker truck. I have a picture of that in another photo. Truck pictures are wonderful if you like old vehicles. But anyway, that's the square in Granville. And there it is, you know, regardless of what the posters are in the photo there too. And again, there you can see how similar things still look there in the square in Granville. I did go to print with the book, and there are a handful of photos that say unidentified location. There were no clues that we could discern. Signs in the doorway, the proprietor's name wasn't evident. There was nothing there that we could really tell. Some of the photos, some of the stations look similar. There were a lot of Atlantic started making them looking very similar, but they were hard to differentiate. So if you notice on page 67, the bottom here, this is a picture taken from the book. About 2 months ago, I get an email. Gentleman buys the book, wants to tell me that page 67 is his family. I mean, you can see, I mean, that was his dad in the middle, his two uncles and his grandparents. And he said, I was in Sunbury, where they continued to operate the station for many more years, but he had never seen his father at that young of an age. So our hope as we continue, there are so many wonderful people photos in the book and also in my Gulf binder collection, Gulf oil collection. So our hope is that we find more people going forward. Yes, sir?
Yeah, the backup picture you just had, when was that? Yeah, that one, when is that?
In the 30s.
Going by the sign, they were putting FO and gasoline on for that.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that was a brand. Yeah, Apple, yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, this grouping of photos, maybe to the late 30s, you know, about 37. There's a time period. So I can say for surety that, and then there's photos in there that show credit cards. Well, credit cards weren't around. Well, yeah, they were. So there are signs that say credit cards accepted. Now they were specific to the location there.
Yeah,
But yes.
They're aluminum about this.
Some of them were, well, I have some early paper ones. But anyway, yes, Ethel, White Flash, there were some other brands. But yes, this is 30s. This is mid-30s. So again, we were happy to have that. And so we'll move on to a couple more brief things here. I'm going to wrap it up here pretty soon. Again, being here in New York, this was just a random find in one of my collections while it's not here in New York. This is Perry County. A family gave me this who's featured in the book. Actually, the grandmother's featured in the book, and they own this hotel and gas station. But if you zoom in on that, you can see from about 90 years ago, they had a York Fair poster plastered on the side of their building there, and this was between Newport and Millerstown off of Route 322, Perry County. I thought that was interesting. There was an early York Fair poster there. One of the few color photos that we have, now unfortunately, I don't know why I didn't put this in the book. I just think the clarity, it looks okay here, but I went in the book for really clear photos. Most of them are. The only ones that aren't were for a reason. But there's a street sign there, and on Retro York page, we discovered that that was South George and Boundary Avenue. There was a clue in the back there, a Dodge dealership. Stetson, I think, was the name, and a lot of people alerted me to the location of this. I have another angle of this pointing the opposite way, and there's an old food fair, if you remember that name, old food fair building right across the street. So I have that. The hot rod there, and the colored pictures and the gas pumps, but the street sign right there in the middle, it's a little muddled, you can't read it, but that's South George and Boundary Avenue. Did Christy come today? Oh yeah, Christy is back there. Oh, great. So Christy's back there. And just the other day, she posted this flyer of her grandfather's gas station, one of his gas stations, his Gulf Station on North George Street. And there's Mr. Gladfelter in the top, the right corner, and there's the photos of the service station, and you can see when it opened, and the old phone number, and great, so I was glad to see that. Someone said, hey, Jimmy, do you have any more photos or anything related to this? And, it's pretty, it's a long shot for me to have something. But lo and behold, if you take a look at this, that's okay. If you go back and you look, take a mental image of his face and the gas station. In my binder, I have the photo that was used for that flyer. And in the next picture, I also have the uncropped photo of Christy's grandfather. That just happened to be in this binder here. And how, after 65 years, she put something on a Facebook page, and only a few days ago, we match up the original photos that should still even be around. But some sort of fate that we chatted, we've been chatting, and that was just recently done. So I was excited about that, happy to make Christy some prints of that. And I know she has some more gas station history that I'm sure we'll be displaying at the Ag and Industrial Museum. Little stories like that keep this project exciting. I printed 3,500 books, which the friends said, hey, that was a lofty amount of books. Well, I sold 1,000 of them in short order. I marketed heavily on Facebook, signings and talks, but it's enjoyable. And meeting people and families and things that are coming out of it are what is keeping the project interesting for me. And my mother passed, it'll be 2 years on Mother's Day. And she saw the project get started and didn't see it finish. But she knows how excited I was for it. And she's pictured in the back of the book, along with some thank yous from some other folks. That's the only part of it I wrote. So moving forward. Yes, sir.
Would that be the northwest corner of that intersection? There's a parking garage there now. That's the northwest.
This specific photo here right now, or this my previous photo. This one right here.
The southeast corner is the market, and the northeast corner is used to be the post office years ago. That would have to be the northwest corner of that intersection.
But you're talking about this slide here, okay? Because I don't know, only because I brought it up, because Christine here made me aware, and I don't know if a lot of you are aware, that York County History Center, 861 results found. I don't know if you're familiar with Mr. Ness. I just learned about him, but I don't know specifically about that because I'm just learning that there is a wonderful archive on the Facebook, on their website, of service stations from this area.
There's a foreign restaurant across Beaver Street from the market, and across Philly, there's a parking garage. That would have to be that northwest corner.
When did that furniture place?
Is that photograph in the book?
No, I'm just learning about this. You can access it on their website. You go ahead to the next slide just to show you, because I enlarged it. That's just a small picture. But you can see, if you contact the York County History Center, it looks like you could purchase, and you can just sift through hundreds of photos that I don't even know about. So could there be some future project with My Got Gas book and York County History Center? Maybe a display at the museum with some of these photos. But my plan is to put some of my nameless faced photos, like Mr. Gladfelter was previous to this talk today. And my hope is people will discover some of the folks in these photos. And, but is there enough for another book? People said, what's your second book going to be? And I'm honestly running out of gas. This has been a wonderful project. There won't be a second book. There may be a reprint, possibly, if I'm lucky enough to sell out. Maybe I'll add some more photos that I forgot. I'll add some names to it that were left out. But York County has a wonderful collection of photos that you can all go through from their website. And then lastly, in my book, I think some of you saw, and you'll be able to see, hopefully you'll want to purchase the book. You can see on the table over there that I have an old imprinter, an old credit card imprinter. And in every one of my books, I open each one up, and I have old stock credit card forms. So if you remember, before you used to insert a card into a gas pump, self-service, somebody would come out to your car with an imprinter and a form, a carbon form, and would make a credit card receipt for you. You get the copy, they throw away the carbon form. Well, in the back of every one of my books is an old Texaco or Gulf or Sinclair, Mobil. I have thousands of old receipts, and I thought it was a novel way to use them. So you can see on there, I had a little metal plate made, and that's the device I use. That has the name of the book and my name. That's our phone number up at my business. The price is $29.95 that I key in on there. And then the date on there, March 8th, 1965 is my birthday. So that's a little author's secret on there. I couldn't put today's date on there. It doesn't even go into the 2000s. That piece is so old. So basically that's, my talk. And I'm, again, very excited for doing this. I appreciate York having me here. Hopefully this was interesting. But I'm going to continue promoting I plan on doing some things with the Lincoln Highway Association, maybe some tours. We'll revisit old gas stations. I'm excited to have a spot in the York York Center, York Agricultural and Industrial Museum. Boy, is that a gem. So I'm going to have some things in there in a few weeks, and then I will broadcast that on Facebook, on the Retro York page, and just so we're going to keep this project going, and hopefully we'll have a fast winter so we can get the old cars back out and do some things, because I like promoting history and this specific type, because who'd have thought old gas stations would be that interesting, but we all relate to them. We all have a connection. We need fuel, obviously, to keep us mobile. We're cars. I don't know whether battery operated, solar power is going to be as exciting for vehicles in the future, but for right now, I like good old fashioned cars, and I plan to be around, and so if any of you want to talk afterwards, have questions, I'm glad to stick around for a while. Yes, sir.
I want to just mention something just for the group. This is something that I've been driving my wife crazy for more than 30 years as we drive around. And I don't know whatever possessed me. That's why this book has been a godsend for me. But for years, as we drive around, I see buildings that used to be gas stations. And a lot of them are smoke shops, or they're ice cream parlors or stuff. But it's fascinating, especially if you're around York here. You don't have to drive very far before if you're looking for it. It's really interesting to find out how many buildings that looking at them, that they used to be gas stations. It's really something I've been doing for years, and here comes this book that solidifies it.
Well, you'll enjoy then looking at this collection too, And whether it's worthy of something, I think we could put together a display at one of their museums, you know, even if it's a short-term display where they'll print posters like I've done. I usually take more posters with me to places. But you're going to find that. And I've been in Lidditz. I spoke in Lidditz and did the same. I had Lidditz posters. I plan to be down in Chambersburg and doing some more of this. And every city, every town. I mean, there were many corners we found. All four corners were gas pumps, gas stations. It's amazing how many there were. I don't have them all. I have Atlantic brand primarily, but there are some Texaco and Sinclair pictures in there because interestingly, locations had multiple brands. You don't do that today, but you'll see there were the brands, one pump next to each other. There was an Esso next to an Atlantic, next to a Sunoco. I don't know if they were coming out of the same tank in the ground, but they were that close but it's interesting to see that evolution there too. So we have car dealerships. The gentleman who runs Carlisle Events, Mr. Miller, happened to be looking at the book, and he found one of his old Ford dealerships, just coincidentally pictured from Elizabethtown, that I had a picture of, because I did some signings at Paul Carlisle this past year. So we'll see. Some fun things are going to continue to come out of it, and you know, we'll go as long as I can. But I still have quite a few books to sell, and I appreciate any sales. I will sign them. I will take a credit card. I have no change, so I can take a credit card or cash or a check even. So I have plenty, even though I have about 10 books there, I have probably another 30 in the car because I'm always traveling with books. Thank you very much.
That's the pizza shop in Halifax.
That's why I brought it.